Hello and welcome to the Choralosophy Podcast, a weekly podcast whose mission is multifaceted. Each week when you tune in, you will find episodes that question best practices, challenge music education dogma, facilitate conversations about touchy topics, demonstrate pedagogies, and conversations where colleagues learn from each other. Episode 226, Breaking Down Vocal Ped with David Jones. One of the core functions of a choir director or vocal music educator is to teach people to love and understand their voice. This episode is the latest addition to the Choralosophy Vocal Pedagogy Suite. The link is in the show notes. Voice teacher David Jones joins me this week to discuss some tips, approaches, and even some exercises and language to try in our rehearsals with singers of all ages. In today's episode, we have the privilege of hearing from David, a dedicated vocal pedagogue who began his journey as a high school singer in a choir. David shares his experiences studying under renowned vocal teachers like Alan Lindquest and emphasizes the vital balance of vocal registration to avoid strain, keeping the voice healthy. We'll dive into concepts like the perfect attack or coordinated onset, which is crucial for both young singers and adults. David explains how a coordinated onset leads to better breath support and control. We spend a lot of time discussing ways to help singers release tension, allowing for freely legato singing. Demonstrations and descriptions of several exercises that were new to me had me excited to try new ones in my class. As we discussed teaching beginning singers, David emphasized the importance of establishing good habits early on and shared his unique methods, like various tension transfer exercises. I also really enjoyed the discussion towards the end of the episode about technique phobia and the concern that technical perfection often gets associated with dry or emotionless performance. Spoiler alert, it doesn't have to. So tune in, stick around all the way to the end and have your thinking stimulated and challenged, then weigh in yourself with your related ideas and experiences over on the Facebook Choralosophers group or over on choralosophy.substack.com. Ludus, the platform trusted by thousands of organizers to power their event ticketing, marketing, and fundraising, has just upped its game with an incredible new feature, volunteer management. Now you can streamline your volunteer coordination like never before. Volunteers can easily sign up for opportunities and shifts online while you effortlessly approve sign-ups, track hours, and manage your volunteer team. Say goodbye to volunteer management headaches and hello to seamless coordination with Ludus. Try it at ludus.com/choralosophy and revolutionize your events. Nearly 200 people voluntarily chip in every month to make sure that the costs for this show are underwritten. But, of course, it's also an exchange. When you sign up for Patreon or paid Substack memberships, either one, you will get access to my Google folder full of goodies, presentation slides from any presentation that I've done over the last several years. It also has rubrics that I have created for class, for grading episodes, supplemental materials, repertoire lists, so you'll have access to that. Plus, of course, there is the private podcast feed, which you can hear once a month, so you can go to patreon.com/choralosophy to sign up there for as little as $3 a month, or you can just upgrade your free Substack subscription to a paid Substack subscription. Either way, the money goes to the same place for the same purpose. The producers and inner circle at Patreon are Venture Studios, Brian Long, Angie Schilling, Danelle Eckert, David Kowalczyk, Kyle Peterson, Max Jackson, Michael Herron, and Steve and Kathy Kakacek. All right, everybody. I'm here with David Jones, voice teacher from New York City, and we're going to be talking today about vocal pedagogy and some common issues that arise with singers as we all strive to teach singers in the best possible way. Of course, David comes at it from a private voice studio perspective. I come at it from choral directing group perspective, and I'm excited to compare some notes with David. So welcome.
Thank you. Thank you, Chris. Thanks for inviting me today.
This will be fun. Why don't you start out by just sharing with folks more about who you are, what your background is, and what you do every day?
Okay, well, I started as a high school singer in a choir, of course, like a lot of people, like many people that I've worked with lately. And I grew up in Texas on a ranch and had two older sisters that were pianists and one was a singer. So I was sort of pulled into the singing in public schools, which is a great place to introduce people to music and teach them musicianship. And I went to TCU, where I studied with a Robert Shaw conductor, And so my major was music education. I had a lot of vocal
Oh,
problems. I had a lot of vocal problems when I was younger because I'm really light lyric baritone, and I was singing in the tenor range with a lot of squeeze.
mm,
So that was my beginning of my search to find a good teacher, and I ended up with Alan Lindquest in California, and then Dixie Neal, who was the teacher of Ben Hepner, and and then Evelyn Reynolds, who studied with Arlene Auger's teacher. If you want to hear a really wonderful light singer who did a lot of wonderful Bach cantatas, Arlene Auger was a beautiful singer who balanced body connection and lyricism in a beautiful way. In fact, I use her as an example for my lighter sopranos to listen to because she sang so beautifully in such a balanced way.
mm-hmm,
And
mm-hmm.
so then I came to New York in 1978 as a songwriter writing for Barbara Streisand.
Interesting.
And and so I came to New York, and of course, Streisand didn't record any ballads, and that's all I wrote, of course. And and so I came to New York to get a publishing deal, but literally disco took everything. Streisand was recording disco. Everybody was recording disco. So I think I sold one American Express commercial after I got to New York, and I thought I was going to get rich and have a publishing deal and have a huge career in composition. Well, then I went to Lindquist in 1979, and a whole other world opened for me. He started my journey into really studying vocal pedagogy and really learning about old world vocal training because he studied with amazing teachers. He worked with Enrico Caruso. He worked with UC Bierling's teacher. His first teacher was a Garcia trained teacher. His second teacher was Lamperti based. So I studied with him for a whole summer, and I got a lot of information from him. He was 90 and I was 29. And my favorite thing to say was, I sounded 90 and he sounded 29. So I knew there was something really wrong. So he taught me that age in the voice is mostly misuse, and that if you can really find the ability to balance your registration, to find the thin edges of the chords and never really thicken the chords, because that's what really tends to cause squeeze, then you can sing as long as you keep your health. In
Yeah,
fact, one of my best sopranos, and I'm amazed every time I see her. She progresses and progresses, and she'll have her 83rd birthday before long.
wow.
So the voice can keep growing and changing beyond the hormonal changes, and you can progress and progress and progress.
That's
And
incredible. Now, as far as day-to-day life in for you now, you are primarily teaching a studio. Is that how you would describe your
right,
day-to-day?
yeah, I ended up becoming very interested in working with solo voices. But I've also done a lot of work with damaged voices. I work with a couple of laryngology offices here. I work with a really wonderful voice therapist here named Shirley Tennyson. And we had one tenor, for example, that had a polyp, a European singer, and he was scoped every 3 days in the doctor's office. He worked with Shirley every other day, and he worked with me every day. And I just got what has happened over the years is that through research, people have found, or scientists have found, that a lot of the sounds that Lindquist worked with were therapeutic for the voice. He was the first teacher that I know of that started working with damaged voices back in 1940, before we even had voice therapy. So he was a fascinating person in that he was ahead of his time.
Yeah, yeah. Well, that's really interesting. And so one of the things that I'm interested in jumping in with you regarding some of the because
Mhm.
I looked through your Facebook page, which for everyone listening, I highly recommend the David Jones Voice Teacher Facebook page because it's just tons of useful information that can be kind of boiled down. Now, for your edification, folks have started requesting me getting you on the show for quite a while. Actually, after I did an episode with Ken Bozeman, I'm
Oh
not sure if
yeah,
you
yeah, I
know
know
who that
Ken.
is.
Yeah, I know
Yep.
Ken.
As soon as that episode came out, people kept saying, "And now you need to get David Jones next." Like that was
That's
the
funny.
request. And so I started following you on Facebook after that, and just was getting tons and tons of valuable information. So we could do
Great.
this for like 5 hours today if I wanted to, but I'm not
Right.
going to make you do that. So what I
Okay.
did was I selected a few topics that you posted on there that I do feel like are the most universal for the music education classroom for young singers and for adult
Right.
solo singers, that they can just kind of apply really across genres, across choral, across operatic, across so many things.
Hmm.
And
Right.
you mentioned that Professor Lindquest a second ago, and I had chosen the post you had made about Lindquist's perfect attack or onset.
Right.
And
Right.
the
Hmm.
reason I wanted to start with that is because that's actually one of my big pedagogical things in the choral classroom. Is I've discovered over the years that if the onset of the singers, even in a group, is
Hmm.
not coordinated or
Hmm.
balanced or whatever terminology, I'll let you talk about that in a second. If that doesn't happen from the very first note of the phrase that we sing, we have to stop and start over, because
Right.
the singers run out of breath. They can't crescendo decrescendo. They end up pushing if they do try to crescendo, etc. So why don't you talk to us a little bit about this idea? It says during your study with Alan Lindquest years ago, he spoke of what he calls the perfect attack or onset.
Right.
What does that mean in your world?
In my world, there is a movement working a lot with chord closure, but the key is to close the chords on the thin edges and not to over thicken.
Mm-hmm.
This is a very difficult thing to find. That's why in voice therapy, people use voice Vs, they use NGs, humming exercises, anything that will allow the chords to stretch and thin as you go up. Lindquist had me speak the words, every orange, every orange, every orange, and he said that's a perfect attack. He
Huh.
simplified it. He simplified it. So I even would make a every orange, and I just made a little exercise out of it. You can use it with a choir too.
Yeah.
Every every orange, and then you will have this perfect onset. So some people have too much glottic pressure. Some people have too little adduction. So for those people who have a lot of hard glottic pressure, then I use Lamperti's breath before tone. And that is based on, this is imagery, not scientific truth, but he would have the singers move the air across the root of the tongue to the soft palate. Ha, ha, not ha, ha, out the mouth, but ha, ha, very much in the position of the French like uncle to get the tongue elevated. And if you can use that feeling of the internalized sigh, which William Vennard used in his teaching, then the chords will come together right as you think the breath flow to the palate. For people who have hard glottic and too much from the bottom, that really does help them.
Okay.
And then there are other people who breathe, and they just go right through the chords. So the chords never close after the breath.
Right.
So Lindquist gave a great image for me. He said, inhale as though you are in conversation and you forgot your thought. And you would do this. Oh, I forgot what I was going to say.
Oh, okay.
And
Yeah.
something caps the breath, and that's the chords coming together. So in working with groups, and I've worked with a lot of choirs along the way. In fact, Lindquist said one of the most rewarding musical experiences is singing in a really wonderful choir and feeling the tight harmonies and enjoying that experience of all that sound around you. In fact, he trained children's choirs in the Philippines after World War II for a radio station. He had a very interesting life.
Yeah.
But so there are two kinds of experience, the two kinds of people that walk in the studio. So what you might have to do is hear your singers individually, then vocalize them separately with different exercises
Yes.
to bring them to what they need specifically for their time, that period of their development.
Now, if it's okay, I want to back you up before we get too far onto this.
Right.
Why every orange? What was it about that phrase that helped, do you think, to create that natural onset?
I think it just gives just enough adduction without over squeezing.
Okay. But is it those particular words, or is it the
Yes,
way of
it's the
speaking?
words. It's the
Okay.
words. It's both actually, but it's the words that usually the words will do it for you. But Lindquist would have me speak. He would have me breathe with a rounded embouchure. Eh, eh, eh. And when you find the perfect onset on the thin edges, you feel as though the chords are gently stretching together rather than slapping together.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
And
I
so
see.
he would have me speak the air vowel repeatedly. Eh, eh, then he would have me move through a scale. And then he would try to apply that gentle closure to the open vowels by going from eh to ah or e to o. And he said the key to acoustical alignment is to find the ring of the closed vowels in the open vowels and the space of the open vowels in the closed vowels.
Mm-hmm.
And then you have a nice mixture of acoustics.
Yeah, that's okay. That is very helpful and very clarifying. So I think maybe the for people listening, that every orange phrase is useful. And correct me if I'm wrong. This is just me trying to like
Mm-hmm.
recycle this stuff.
Yeah.
Is useful because the opening vowel, the first vowel, is an open vowel, and for so many singers, those open vowels are harder to get that ring happening right away. Is
Right.
that am I onto something?
Exactly. So if I were to start an ah vowel, I would breathe. In my case, because my voice was overblown because I was singing a higher tessitura than designed. So, but if I were to breathe and start on an ah vowel, in my situation, I would have to feel the O in the throat and almost the eh at the chords. Ah, ah, I'll. You see, so I wouldn't really have a out the mouth, and I wouldn't have a glottic but so it's very, very gentle, and I think this is where Garcia's coup de glotte was misconstrued, and it really almost ruined his reputation. Um, Glottic closure is not glottic shock. Glottic shock is when
What's the
we.
difference?
The difference is glottic shock is when the chords are oversqueezed and you get a noise at the onset. So you have three types of onset: glottic, breathy, and perfect. And we all want to find the perfect.
Mm-hmm.
And so whatever that, often I have singers start an onset with a hand in front of their mouth and have them not blow air because they're so used to just driving a lot of air pressure. In fact, I've worked in choral settings where I've had the choir sing with a hand in front of their mouth. And the minute they stop pushing the air pressure, then suddenly this warm, round resonance starts coming into the whole group.
Yeah. Now, would you say that is because when the onset isn't coordinated and is either overblown or all the various things you outlined before that can go wrong there, that then we respond subconsciously as singers by adding muscular pressure? Is
Hmm.
that
Hmm.
do you
Yeah.
find that to be a common phenomenon?
Yeah, breath pressure is common in general, and I love choirs. I love the beauty of the choral sound.
We all love to travel with our students, but we definitely don't love planning a trip. I know I've been there as the point person for details, and it is a nightmare. Forms, payments, fundraising, it's a never ending task that takes away from doing what we love. That's where Kaleidoscope Adventures comes in. They've been planning performance trips for more than 30 years and handle all the details from start to finish. And one of the best parts about Kaleidoscope, they have crowdfunding options for every traveler. Contact Kaleidoscope Adventures at mykatrip.com to find out how they can take your travel beyond expectations.
What I tell singers is when you're in a choral setting, and let's face it, most of the jobs that we have as young professional singers are choir jobs to start with.
Mm-hmm.
And that's how you make a lot of your money, is singing in a good choir. As maybe a paid soloist in a church job. But what I tell people is you can listen for fullness of tone, but not quality of sound. Because when you start listening for quality of sound, you'll squeeze to make a sound you think is right. So you want to go
Ah,
through sensation. So you're in a setting where you do need to listen for tuning. but you want to try to devoid the inner ear of creating quality. Because a lot of choral singers retract their tongue and they pull the resonance out of the voice because they're making a false color.
Mm-hmm.
You see, what they feel is a blend.
Do you think that's because we hear a singer next to us, but then we hear ourselves differently than we hear that singer next to us, and so we're trying to make those two make those two things match?
Exactly. And so when we're in a group, and I have a student who is in Philadelphia area, and she's got a really good job as a soloist, and she said, David, all the voices are huge. I said, well, you're going to have to not try to match their sound. You're going to have to go into your sensations and to sustain your own individual quality and then let them sing the way that they sing. And she's never had a problem since, but she was becoming vocally fatigued at first because she was driving air pressure, trying to match the sounds around her. So the difficulty and the discipline, I think, is finding the vowels that create a blend, that create resonance, that create beauty of tone, and go for the feeling instead of the sound. Because in a choral group, you often cannot hear yourself because you hear other people around you.
Yeah, no, that's fantastic. Now, in the post that you made about this onset topic, you described an exercise, which I'd like for you to talk a little bit more about. And this was the chewing hum. What is the chewing hum, and why is it helpful for this?
I love those three words. I don't know. But the chewing hum, Lindquest worked with the chew, and I remember I was so young and green when I worked with him. I was embarrassed to chew in front of somebody. But he was working with releasing tension in the masseter muscles.
Okay.
So what you can do is, when you chew with the lips together, when the jaw drops and you decide you want to make sound and you just want to chew straight down.
Okay.
If you do that, you'll feel the chords come right together on the thin edges.
So hum while chewing.
Hum while chewing.
So like a
right. And I let the jaw go down as I make the sound.
Interesting. And you're okay. And so then you've suggested like doing that on you're just demonstrating there some just random pitches, but then also doing that on like a 1-3-5, like a do mi so kind of a thing.
Right. Exactly.
And is that really just to build the I guess for lack of a better term, muscle memory of the chord closure?
Right. And the thin edge function. For example, I had a tenor, several months ago come to me, and he'd been taught with a lot of heavy glottic pressure, a lot of thickening of the chords. And the only thing that worked was the chewing hum. But when he did the first of all, he couldn't overblow. He had to release the jaw, tongue. And when you release the jaw on the chewing hum, the jaw goes back, and the upper part of the sternocleidomastoid softens. And this is something that we all need to find in order to find freedom in the pharyngeal vowel formation.
Okay, yeah. Now, is that, am I in the right place if I kind of go to where my ear lobe skin meets my jaw skin, so to speak?
Well, a little bit further behind is the upper attachment of the SCMs, the sternocleidomastoids. And if you do this, you'll feel the throat open right there. Those muscles actually widen ever so slightly. Maybe it's even a third of an inch, very tiny. But the chewing hum is great for choral settings because most people have a tight neck and therefore a tight jaw. I mean, it's part of being on this planet.
Yeah.
And what I find is when I use the chewing hum, I get much more blend, but yet there's a really beautiful resonance and color at the same time. So the jaw's opening, but it's not hyperextending too open. So we want the jaw to go down and back, but not forward out of its socket. When it goes forward out of its socket, the chords cannot come together.
Yeah. So I'm trying to picture this with high school kids because that's what I do every day, and I can imagine a scenario where It's actually a very common phenomenon. When I tell them to create a vowel, the jaw does want to come forward,
Right.
especially adolescent boys. It's less common with girls. I don't know
Mhm.
why, but it just seems to be.
Right.
There's that muscle tension, and I'm trying to do this hum, this chewing hum with my jaw going forward, and I don't know that I can. It's very
Exactly.
difficult.
Exactly. It would be difficult for them to do that the wrong way. So
Right.
then what I do, and I always keep some beginners in my studio,
Mm-hmm.
because I think we need to keep those chops up for the beginner. It's a different kind of teaching. I
Mm-hmm.
mean, I've taught Met singers, internationally famous singers, but I love working with beginners because most of the time they're really eager to learn. But the chewing hum would be very difficult to throw the jaw forward.
Yeah. Yeah. I like
So
that.
often I would have somebody, uh, if you sang a phrase of a song like, uh, alma del core, then what the singer will find is the ability to change pitch without grabbing.
Yep.
They'll learn the softening of the neck. The other thing with high school kids, I taught high school. I taught elementary music, middle and high school.
Wow, that's great.
So I have been through the fire myself. But the high school kids that I worked with, I used the NG with a hanging jaw.
Mm-hmm.
Now I would use the chewing hum because I think it's more useful at releasing the jaw, tongue, and the neck. But the difficulty I find is to get the young male singers, when their voices are changing especially, they start to lift and press the head forward. To get them to align their ears somewhat over their shoulders
Mm-hmm.
so that they're not, because the minute the head goes forward, the larynx goes up. So what I did with them was what my last teacher, Evelyn Reynolds, gave me. I would have them what she called build a house on the nose. Now
Okay.
sounds ridiculous, but you actually make the shape of a roof with your fingertips, put it over the nose, ya 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 ya. And what it does is it tricks them into not grabbing the neck.
Interesting.
You see? And
Yeah.
also, they find that cupo space automatically when they loosen the jaw. And I have professional singers I've used that with, and they look at me and they say, "Why does that work?" And I always say, because it's difficult to tense the neck.
Yeah. 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 I like to tell students that it's difficult for our brain to send too many tension signals to too many different places in our body all at once. And so
Right?
I call that what I would describe that as, and you feel free to disagree with this, but I would call
Right.
what you just demonstrated as a tension transfer exercise, where
Uh-huh.
I'm going to take my brain signal and I'm going to put it here doing this other stuff. So now it can't
Right.
send that signal to the back of
Right.
the neck to be tense.
Exactly.
Yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah. Okay. That's really good, and I like that. And kind of on the topic of keeping your chops up with by having beginning students, I think that's a really good. I'm so glad you said that because one of my pet peeves in the voice world. My wife's a voice teacher and vocal pedagogy nerd, and she's really excited that
Uh-huh.
I was doing this conversation today. And one of the things
Right.
that we kind of a pet peeve of mine is that we don't recognize the two distinctly different areas of expertise sometimes within the voice training world. For example, if I can be could be a college professor of voice and have a doctoral degree and only teach graduate school singers, which is wonderful, and we need those people. But also, it makes me, as a high school teacher, I think, well, okay, but have fun teaching someone who doesn't know how to get their chords to close at all. Like
Exactly.
when they try to sing, nothing comes out.
Right. Exactly.
So
Exactly.
those because that is a completely different area of expertise to teach the adolescent
Right.
singer and the beginning singer or something like that. So I'm so
Right.
glad you said that. The list of resources that this podcast has generated around it continues to grow. You can, of course, for free, go use the Vocal Pedagogy Suite or the Music Literacy Suite anytime you'd like. Those are sub pages on my website that keep all of those episodes on those two topics organized. So if you are ever wanting to do a deep dive on teaching your kids to read music or sing well, kind of like our main job, you can go there to the website and find those. Quick Google search also will help you find those. And of course, the list of discounts on incredibly helpful products for music educators is also substantial. You can go to 3minutetheory.com and get 15% off with the promo code there. And of course, Sight Reading Factory. Every time you renew your membership for yourself and your student memberships, you can knock 10% off every time you do checkout there. Sightreadingfactory.com, which is a huge benefit to you because it's the best program out there, but also you get a discount, and all of those promo code uses help support this show as well.
Well, I think the high school years are really critical because the voice is changing, and if the singer can develop good habits in high school, they're set up. I have a student who has a private studio in Dallas named Jared Swartz, and he is so excellent with high school students. And he had a 17-year-old soprano who sang on a master class in New York, and I've never heard such warmth and beauty and ring in a voice that young. So at that time, I knew a teacher at University of Tennessee, Knoxville, that I thought she's retired now, but she was active right then. And so she auditioned to go to school there. They had one full scholarship they gave to a grad student. They gave it to her as a freshman. Because she was so balanced and such an artistic and musical singer. And so if singers can develop really good habits in high school, I think that's critically important.
Yeah, absolutely. Completely agree. You're preaching to the choir here. Okay.
Right.
All right.
Right.
If it's okay, let's move to legato singing. I think that's
Okay.
another one that's super universal across all genres, definitely choral as well as solo. And you did a post on this, and pretty recently, it says that we have all heard a singer being instructed to sing more legato, but we must ask ourselves, what is the major physical requirements, or what are the major physical requirements to sing a legato line? And then you list some. And one of them, I'll kind of go point by point here if it's okay.
Sure.
One of them is the first one you listed, laryngeal release or tilt at every vowel in the text. What does that mean?
Okay. So after you roll an R and go to a vowel, ra, re, ri, ro, ru, the larynx drops from the release of the root of the tongue. If I say ra, re, ri, ro, ru, da, me, ni, po, tu, and learn to let that happen as I'm free in my tongue, then I've also set up my feeling for language. The reason the jaw goes forward with lots of singers is that this is up. So I often have singers lengthen the back of the neck, even high school kids. I have them lengthen the back of the neck with their fingers. I call this Alexanderizing the neck. Now, I'm not an Alexander practitioner, but I've studied it for 20 years, and I think it's a great type of body work for singers. But I put hands behind the ears, lengthen the neck, and then I have them speak ra, re, ri, ro, ru. Now, the chewing hum, ra, re, ri. The only way the jaw can go back is if the larynx drops slightly underneath it. If the larynx is up, the jaw will go forward. Now, it's tricky because we don't want to push the larynx down with the root of the tongue either. But if singers can find that freedom after the rolled R and then apply it to text, I'll tell you, a lot of times when we have, for example, a phrase that has all eighth notes and there's a different syllable on each eighth note in text, very difficult to get to the legato line. What we want to do is, when the larynx drops slightly for the vowel, da, da, me, ni, po, tu, la, be, da, me, ni, po, tu, la, be, da, I can articulate over that, and that my larynx is going blip, 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 blip. It's little tiny movements. I think the bottom line is finding freedom in the muscles so that the throat can do what it needs to pronounce in singing.
So that each, maybe if I said it this way, so that each little movement of the articulators above the larynx don't cause the entire larynx to just like freak out.
Exactly. Because as we speak all day, the larynx is in movement, so it doesn't make sense that we should lock it or freeze it
Right.
in singing.
Mm-hmm.
You
Mm-hmm.
see, because it's moving whether I go up in my pitch or down in my low speaking. It's in movement. So, but a lot of people are very tense in the neck and therefore tense in the frontal laryngeals.
Right.
So I work a lot with having people vocalize, tilting head side to side, anything to soften these muscles.
I see. Yeah.
One exercise I used in a choral setting was having singers take 3 fingers on either hand, go behind the neck, find that indentation there, and as they sing, stretch east-west. And what that does is that starts to release the back of the neck, and you'll feel a softening of the front of the neck simultaneously.
Yeah. Yeah. That sounds like another tension transfer kind of a thing.
It certainly is.
Yeah. Uh-huh.
Absolutely.
Okay.
Yeah.
Yeah. All right. So another one on your list here of physical requirements for legato singing is the equalization of the tiny airstream. And then you explain that which helps the larynx to be more stable and therefore primary resonator more open. So talk about the equalization of the tiny air. Why tiny airstream? Why would you describe it that way?
Well, I talk about tiny airstream to indicate that it's not a lot of air pressure. A lot of people sing with too much air pressure. And some people sing with too little flow. So if you look in the world of voice therapy, using the straw therapy to equalize airflow, that's used a lot. If we can equalize airflow, we know that that releases internal laryngeal muscles. And that's why it's used in voice therapy so much. So if you can equalize the airstream on a very little bit of airflow, also if you use a tiny straw, or even a lip buzz, you'll feel the body resistance. You'll feel your support automatically. If you do ha and just blast air out the mouth, the body will collapse. So
Yeah.
your body and your voice won't work together then.
I see. Okay. I like that imagery. Because I think it's not unrelated to the onset thing we were talking about before, because it's just,
Exactly.
the overblowing and all of that. Yeah, that's probably
Right.
that is probably one of the bigger stresses that I have with the way my students sing, is either too much air escaping in the younger singers or the older
Right.
singers falling in love with the volume that they can produce. and then and then
Why that's
yeah,
true.
I think you know what I mean.
I do. Yeah.
Yeah, and so getting that balance, I guess that balance of and so I think I'm going to borrow that tiny airstream concept in class when I come back from the break. I think that'll help a lot.
Okay, good.
We've talked a little bit already about the jaw releasing, but that's also a part of legato singing
Right.
for each vowel. So if it's okay, we'll just move past that one because I think we've kind of
Okay.
covered it.
Okay.
And then the next one on your list is excellent posture. So how do I have my ways of describing posture, but I want you to tell us, how do you describe it to your singers in your studio?
Well, I use a lot of my Alexander training in my teaching, and
Okay.
I don't pretend to be an Alexander practitioner, but I have some physical exercises that I use with helping them find a posture. One of the things I do is that I call it the hugging the tree. A lot of singers will pull their chest really high, and they'll compress the back ribs, and that overblows the cords because of all the pressure against the back wall of the lungs. So what I do is I have them just bring elbows up and hug a tree. And I have them breathe and let their shoulders come up slightly. Because actually, when you breathe up and let the ribs come up, you'll breathe down at the same time. So I
Okay.
use that a lot in a choral setting. Now, choral singers are also, I mean, I don't know if it requires to memorize all their repertoire, but when they're holding a score, that's a whole other thing,
Yeah.
is to make certain that the head doesn't go forward with the posture of the score. So helping them to find the alignment of ears over the shoulders while they're holding score will help as well.
Yeah.
But a lot of singers will either pull up here, you see, or they'll collapse. But if they hug a tree, they'll elevate the side ribs, which is part of the Alexander training. And what that will do is that will help them find a suspended open rib cage, and it will decrease their ability to overblow.
That's really good. I love that about the rib cage. That's another one I'm going to borrow too, because I think that's another one that is very common with young singers. There just tends to be a kind of I would describe it as unathletic collapsed position
Right.
that
Exactly.
oftentimes happens.
Yeah. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. What about like? Do you ever talk to your singers about legs, feet?
Yeah.
How would you describe that?
What I do is I try to get them to loosen the hip sockets and the knees.
Okay.
I use the image that it feels like you've come off a trampoline and you're still a little bit, tiny bit bent at the hip sockets and the knees so that the knees don't lock. Um, my teacher, Evelyn Reynolds, had a really great image. She said, imagine you're a kangaroo and you're sitting on your tail. Which is a
Yeah.
great, it actually works like a charm. I know it's a silly image, but I'll have people breathe, sit on their tail, and then sing. They'll have the perfect subglottic compression every time.
Interesting. Now, when you, so I'm picturing it, and do you actually ask the singers to do some kind of a squat into the hips, or is
Tiny,
it
tiny bit. So what I'll do
okay?
is I'll have them breathe. You know, the Italians call this sitting on the breath.
Okay.
Basically, what that means is that you're setting up a little bit of breath compression before you start the tone, which keeps you from overblowing the attack or the onset. So I'll have them breathe, sit a little bit. I'll have them kind of drop. Hallelujah. And I always have singers blow out after every exercise
Mm-hmm.
because it teaches them not to stack up air pressure as they
And
sing.
release
Okay?
tension in between.
Right, right.
Yep.
So, in other words, when you get them to bend at the hip sockets, if they breathe and get that feeling of sitting while standing, which is a slight bend at the hip sockets and at the knees, then they're going to have this open torso that's just sort of, well, it's really supported with the legs. Finding the support of the legs without locking the knees and hips is really critical for even being able to breathe, because when the hips lock, the abdominals won't release and the lower back won't release, so it's very difficult to breathe.
Uh-huh. Yeah. I like that. That's really, really good. I'm picturing so with that concept of the how the legs support, I find that a lot of young singers, beginning singers, they picture their voice as only their mouth.
Hmm.
And it's very difficult when in the early years when I say beginners, I do mean like kids that come to a choir class with no experience singing. I don't just mean classical singing. I mean
Right,
they're just not singing. Like they've
right.
never they've never been singing other than just like along with the
Uh-huh.
radio. And then
Yeah.
they tend to like mumble when they sing along with the radio. And then the idea is that they come to my class and I'm asking for this like fully invigorated
Hmm.
maximizing of their body's potential, and they
Right.
picture their voice as just this little front of their face, and I think that's
Yeah.
one of the biggest hurdles that I come across is just getting them to
Okay.
engage their whole body. And I like what you're describing because it gives me then as the teacher a tool to address every step of the way, so to speak.
Right.
Here's what
Right.
your feet should be doing. Here's what your hips should be
Right.
doing. Here's,
Hmm.
all of that. And a lot of times kids, they do want to know those things and they don't do
Right.
them because they don't know.
Right. Well, one of the things, and I give this to beginners, by the way, one of the things that helps people to find their fullness of voice without overproducing the voice
Hmm.
is an exercise I developed years ago with a tenor. And he would think frontal ring and he would squeeze the throat,
Yep.
or he would think space and he would swallow his tongue. So I thought, okay, what is going to help this guy to separate the idea of tongue from the pharyngeal space? So I had him do this. I had him feel the back of the neck. Mm, 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 mm. And I had him open C2 and C3, stretch right behind a little bit, and feel a space behind the tongue root. You might just be able to say, feel a space behind your tongue. But once he felt the vowels there, mm, 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 then he started to feel the balance of the acoustical space and the ring together. But I give that to bare beginners, and it seems to help them even in the early development.
That's really great. Now, for the people listening and not watching, because that's most of my audience, so on that exercise, David had his tongue out,
Right.
so that to release that tongue tension at the back. So it sounded like a hum, but it was actually a tongue out exercise.
Right. I put the tongue between the lips, and then I seal the lips over the tongue and under the tongue. Then I have them stretch the vowel space behind the tongue root. That way, the tongue is isolated, because a lot of people confuse the tongue for open throat space. So they swallow their tongue and try to sing.
Yeah. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but it sounds like the legato topic could be summed up by simply saying, go find the places in the body that often accumulates and dissolve it, and
Right.
legato will start to happen.
That's right. Because the laryngeal muscles, for example, I've had choirs vocalize. I will take fingertips and put them in front of the sternocleidomastoids, and I have them actually press straight back until the neck really widens and they soften, those SCMs. And then I have them vocalize that way. And that is the open throat without tongue root depression.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really great. So this is so helpful. I've got one more of your posts, if that's okay.
Okay,
We'll dig
good.
into a third topic here.
Okay, great.
And this one was a little bit more psychological, it seemed to me, in reading it, which is why I chose it, because we've done some physical things so far. And it was a post
Right.
you made on technique phobia. And it says that some singers fear working on technique, a sort of technique phobia, and they often write fear-ridden responses to your addresses specifying technical issues. I think they
Right.
presume that you, and this is from your writing still, that I instruct singers to think of many things while in performance. And so I think what this post is going after is the idea that singers can become bogged down in the minutia of the technique to the
Right.
point where they then can't connect to the performance. Is that what you're saying?
That's exactly right. I remember one of the things that Mr. Lindquist said to me years ago, many, many years ago. He said, you study technique to forget about it. You study technique to establish vocal habits in the muscles that are healthy, and then you go out and you perform. So I've had singers who, especially professional singers who are out having a career, and part of their fear, I believe, is changing things in the middle of a performance career. That's very nerve-wracking for
Yeah.
anybody. So I try to minimize the amount of information I give them in each hour now. Years ago, when I was young and starting out in my teaching early on, I think I gave them too much to do in 1 hour. But if I can just help them to feel resonance in space and freedom of neck, that's a good first lesson for
Yeah.
them. But I think there is definitely a fear from, shall I say, natural singers who have never really had problems. When they come to me and they start studying technique, some of them are a little uncomfortable with that. So I have to explain to them that this is only to help you establish your foundation acoustically so that you can just go out and perform. And I remember I worked with a famous Helden tenor. Johann Botha was his name. I was his last teacher before he died. And he came to me and he said, well, my colleagues, because he was singing at the Met, my colleagues are asking me why I'm still taking voice lessons. And he said, my answer was, if you're smart, you update the software.
Yeah.
But
And the hardware is changing as you age too.
That's right. That's
Yeah.
right. So years ago, I wrote an article that was published in Classical Singer magazine called Vocalizing Through Menopause. And men have andropause. They have the same, they have hormonal changes in the body as well. Most of the men that come to me who are having trouble vocally are in their late 40s, and their hormones are shifting a little bit and their voice is thickening. So the key to getting through the menopausal
That's me right
work,
now.
in the andropausal work is thinning the chords. And thinning the chords through voice V, something as simple as a voice therapy exercise like a voice V, like just feeling the chords thin out as you go up. And then being able to sustain on the thin edge function. That's kind of the fountain of youth. I mean, vocally, I don't have a lot of practice time, but I can vocalize quite easily now, and I don't really have, my voice is better now than it was when I was 25 and I'm 75.
Yeah. Yeah, that's really great. Now, man, I mentioned that I feel like that's me right now, because one of the things that think about a lot as a singer. I am not a soloist. I dabbled in being a soloist when I was younger, and I was a
Yeah.
voice major for a while, but I switched to choral music ed, and now I do sing in choirs and try to make a professional level sound in the choral world. But I
Right.
don't
Right.
practice my soloistic singing really anymore. And every once in a
Yeah.
while, if I come across the need to do that. And when I mentioned earlier that my wife is a voice teacher and she's very into all of the latest research and all the pedagogical terms, et cetera. And that's one of her most common bits of feedback when she hears me practicing is that my folds are too thick.
Right.
I'm
Right.
over proximating, so to speak.
Yeah. Yeah.
And I sometimes don't know how to fix that.
Yeah.
But that there you go. I mean, that's something
Okay.
I can definitely add into my
Right.
repertoire.
Yeah.
So on this technique phobia thing, I do have kind of another question about this
Uh-huh.
because I also wonder if there's a connection with this issue to one of the more common criticisms that I hear related to modern classically trained singers, which is
Hmm.
sometimes I'll see people or read people's criticism as, well, there's all these technically perfect performances, but with no feeling and no emotion, and I'm not moved, but
Yeah.
I'm impressed. You know,
Exactly.
that kind of thing.
Exactly.
Is there? Do you see a
Hmm.
connection between these two things?
Absolutely. Absolutely. You know, Mr. Lindquist studied in 1938 in Stockholm with two major teachers there. And in their background, what they would do, which I think was really a wonderful idea, and I use it today, to do the same vocal exercise in three different keys. I'm sorry, in one key, three different emotions, contrasting emotions: joy, sadness, anger, and you do it back to back, allowing the emotion and the intention of the emotion to develop the different colors of the voice. This is what, when you describe a singer that is a technical singer and they don't move you, it's because they've never developed the different vocal colors in their voice.
Mm-hmm.
It's the emotional triggers and the emotional work. And what I love about that exercise is that you're keeping your technique because you're using the same exercise in the same key, but with three contrasting emotions with totally different sounds. Yeah.
Yeah, I like that idea. Now, do you think that because earlier you mentioned kind of the old world singing, like the
Hmm.
concept in I'm assuming that's in distinction to modern training in some way.
Hmm.
Do you
Yeah.
feel like that lack, or I'll call it monochromatic, since you said one color, that a lot
Hmm.
of modern singers are being taught to do? Do you feel like that's being taught explicitly, or are we just not spending enough time talking about the emotion with our singers that we train?
I think it's a complicated answer, but I do think that a lot of singers don't study acting, so they don't
Mm,
know how to connect to emotion. And I think it's really good for singers to study acting, straight acting.
mm-hmm.
Um,
Mm-hmm.
I'm trying to think of the name of the opera company up here. There was a wonderful guy who trained singers, Goldovsky Opera. And he was really great at using what he called the Mickey Mouse technique, how to
Mm-hmm.
mirror emotion and just learning the physicality of how the body works with different specific emotions on stage. How do you
Mm-hmm.
mirror what's going on? Um, and it can be very useful for somebody who's not trained in acting, but they want to be effective on stage. Um, but I think also it's a time factor because when you look at university students, they are given too much work in too short a time. They don't really have time to focus on their instrument because they're too busy learning repertoire, going to rehearsals, doing other subject matter, and
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
it's just that they're too loaded down to become excellent and work at their artistry because the artistry is not just about the voice.
Yeah. Yeah. Yeah, that is really great. And I wonder too if if I think about this in contrast to say musical theater singing, which in the
Mhm.
current age, it's very normal for us to think about a musical theater singer as changing the color of their voice depending on
Mhm.
what scene they're in, even
Uh-huh.
what emotion the character is currently living through, etc. And we don't have that stereotype necessarily for modern opera singers, for example.
No, no, we
We don't
don't.
picture that. It doesn't mean that none of them do that, because of course they're great artists that do.
Right,
do that.
right.
But would you say that that was more common in the quote old world way of classical singing?
Well, it's interesting. I don't think that I don't think that there was that requirement of acting years ago. That there's more of that now.
I
And
see.
in terms of the operatic stage, um, I remember an interview with Birgit Nielsen, and she said, "Well, they're requiring so much of us artists. They're requiring us to move and to act and sing."
Yeah,
and
right.
so I don't know the answer to that, but I know then we had the people like Maria Callas who you just couldn't take your eyes off her when she walked on stage. Someone that I worked with vocally at the Met was Deborah Voigt. She walks on stage, you can't take your eyes off her. She
Hmm.
has that, whatever that is, that draws people. It's a charisma. You can call it a charisma. You can call it acting. But whatever that is, part of it is a gift and part of it is study.
Yeah.
And I don't think that singers have time to study that in school when they're a music major to find I have a student in Berlin who does these kinds of acting master classes. Her name is Janet Williams, and she does those. She had a big career at the Staatsoper there, but she does a lot of her classes in different schools, universities.
Yeah.
And a lot of times, the student will look at her with these empty eyes, like, I've never even thought this way before.
Wow. Yeah. So it's almost like maybe the classical singing world is just needing to evolve with the modern demands of singing, of
Right,
acting, character, etc.
right.
Yeah.
Well, I think it would be great if it would be a part of the training in university.
Yeah.
Then you have, I mean, and I've dealt with the music theater world a lot too. The problem with music theater singers is that they make the emotion through sheer emotion, but not technique.
Right.
So a lot of
Yeah.
times they blow themselves out because
Hmm.
they're just gushing all this emotion and they're overblowing the instrument.
Yeah.
So teaching them how to mirror emotion and keep their technique, to me, that's the key.
Yeah. Yeah. That we don't have to choose between emotion and technique. We can use one to
No,
serve the other, and vice versa.
right,
Yeah.
exactly,
Yeah.
exactly.
Yep. That's wonderful. Well, David, this has been fantastic. I think this people are gonna eat this stuff up, and this is so helpful. So many usable things. I appreciate you spending an hour with me.
Well, thank you. Thank you for inviting me, Chris. It's a pleasure meeting you too.
Awesome. Thank you so much.
You're so welcome. Okay.
Okay, so then in the silence there, I will cut that. But
Okay.
before we sign off, let me tell you how this will work behind the scenes.
Uh-huh.
So I release shows on Fridays.
Uh-huh.
I've got your show set up to be the second Friday in December.
Okay.
And wait, no, that's not right. Hold on. It's the first Friday in December because we have another Friday here in November. So
Oh,
basically a
okay.
week and a half away.
Yeah. Okay.
And the way I'll do it is I'll get it all packaged up like I normally do all my episodes. I will create a graphic that represents
Okay.
kind of the featured image for the episode. I
Okay.
always include some type of a paraphrase of what kind of the episode is about, and I send that
Right.
to the guest ahead of time for approval, basically to make
Okay.
sure that
Sure.
you feel comfortable with how I summarize
Okay. Great.
that, and
Okay.
then I'll use that to create a link that is the home base for your episode, etc. And then I'll send it to you for sharing. I
Great.
will be sharing it, of course, and I'll be plugging your Facebook page because I think a lot of choir directors should be following it too because it's got a lot of very useful stuff.
Great. Thank you.
And we'll try to get the word out.
Okay. Thank you,
Okay,
sir. Thank you so
awesome.
much, Chris.
Yep, thank you
Okay.
so much.
You have a good day.
All
Good
right,
to
bye.
see you.
Yep, you too.
Okay. Bye-bye.
Thank you so much for sticking around to the end of a conversation. If you are still hearing my voice, that means you're one of the MVPs, one of the diehards, one of the real ones, as the kids say. So if you are willing on the way out to check out a few different ways that you can help me continue to make this show high quality. One, use the promo code. That's the biggest one at Sight Reading Factory, at mymusicfolders.com, at mychoirropes.com, at graphitepublishing.com, and endeavormusicpublishing.com. All of those take the Choralosophy checkout code, and of course now the newest one is 3-Minute Theory. You can get a 15% discount when you enter Choralosophy at checkout there. And of course, Going to Apple Podcasts and leaving a positive review is very helpful there, and sharing the episodes to your colleagues in real life and on social media. All of those things are incredibly helpful and allow me to continue to create this resource for you. Thank you so much for tuning in. We'll see you next time.